Hello and welcome everybody to the Magma podcast. I am your host, Saul Blair, and I want to welcome our very special guest, Udi Kalmanovitz. Udi, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. I'm doing great. It's great to see you again, and I was looking forward for today.
Yeah, me as well. I want to set this conversation up a little bit. You've been a presenter for us in the past, and have a wide array of skills and mega talent. Of course the topic of this conversation is your professional career and the things that you're doing. But a little backstory is more than a few years back now. I was traveling to Israel with my father, spending some time, and I ended up giving a little presentation at the Israel Animation College, which is where you and I met. And I wanted to tell you, it's something that I bring up so often, but that whole experience, and in full transparency for me, I'm not used to holding big crowds of people or giving presentations in that regard. But I felt like that experience at the college was so amazing, and so many people engaged in so much talent at the college, in particular there in Tel Aviv. And your experiences there as a professor and adjunct instructor, how amazing that must be to be surrounded by so many creative folks at that college particularly.
Well, that's a great question. It's something that is actually, I think it's something that is important for me, like more than everything else, actually. I told you before when we spoke privately that to me, I'm a teacher first and artist second. So I really enjoy teaching and being surrounded by like these talented students all the time. And actually, like with the years, seeing like your students and your graduates starting to be involved in the field and starting to work and get jobs, and it's amazing. You
How long
know,
have you been teaching?
oh, like for almost like close to 20 years actually. I started teaching very young when I was 23.
Hmm.
I'm 41 right now, so do the math. Um, and when I started teaching, I actually started working with kids uh, um, more than anything else. And then I think like 10 years later, I started working with students and a more grown crowd. Like an interesting story I tell my students all the time. Like me and you met at the IEC at the college, which was an awesome experience for me as well. I like arrived myself to IAC as a student like 14 years ago. So I got to know IAC as a student first, and a teacher much later. Um, and like this place has a soul. I can't describe it differently. It's like even when I got there the first time, like to see the place, when I looked for a place where I wanted to learn, I learned the 3D animation there. um, I just like fell in love in the place. I felt like it has a soul. I felt like it's a place that really sees the industry and where it leads and where everything is evolves. And yeah, and a few years later, I'm where I'm at.
Speaking of the soul in that regard, that's something that I picked up on in meeting you for the first time. It was just I can see that you have that same creative soul. I look at your artwork and I look at the stuff that you're focusing on, the subject matter and the way that you approach it. It very much resonates with you, and I imagine that sort of connecting with the school and connecting with those creative folks there, that I observed as well. Just so many people captivated and interested in learning more and sharing as much as possible. Where do you think that comes from? Because you and I have talked about this in the past, and in where the industries lie in terms of being in more focused areas, maybe North America and parts of Europe. What's that experience like for you being in Israel?
Well, that actually it's kind of a complex issue. We can go on and on about it. Like for people, I think like all over the world, when they think of the industry, and when say industry, we're talking about illustration and art in general. But We're actually meaning more of the entertainment industry. So creating art for entertainment, if it's for animation or for games, for films and stuff like that. So people all over the world, they see it like the core of the industry is in the United States. And that's actually creates like a different point of view about the field and about the industry from people all over the world, because that means that for them to reach where they want to reach, it probably means they have to relocate. Obviously, working remotely, it's something that exists, but as we know, like in the more like the bigger positions, you're mostly required to be like an in-house artist, unless you have like this tremendous following or a great monitoring and connections going for yourself. So that's actually makes everything a little bit different in the way you want to approach things, because it's create like this big dilemma between comfort and earning money and earning an honest living, or taking this big risk, relocate yourself, trying to find an apartment, and try to settle in and working in a foreign place, which is a big move for anyone. And for some people, it's not even like on the menu. Let's say someone has like I don't know, he has kids and has like obligations, and he can't make like such a big move. So what happens then is that the field become more restricted and more limited in a way. And I believe that in every region, people need to also look at what's going on inside their surroundings. Because obviously, like working remotely, most of the time you're going from project to project, from client to client. But if you're looking for something that is more like stable or ongoing, like a regular position, so you probably want to start looking around you and realize what will be the best approach to get inside.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something that, this particular aspect I find so interesting because it doesn't, we don't necessarily talk about it enough in these spaces. And I think one of the magnetic aspects of what Magma kind of has to offer is this idea of collaboration and building communities around art, maybe not always necessarily for professional usage, and simply to engage with other creative folks. And I keep coming back to this idea of so many talented folks, that you're surrounded by in Tel Aviv and that exist inside of Israel that aren't necessarily seen in those same circles. And so I guess my question is, when you were getting started in this, how did you get started on this pursuit of art? Like, what led you down this to seek this professional career as an artist?
Well, so I started like working, like declaring myself as an artist back when I was 21. Now, back then, like everybody's listening, need to realize we're talking about different times. We're talking about 20 years ago, and yeah, like there's a lot of artists that are go way back more than me. But we're talking about times where you didn't have so much content on YouTube. I don't think I'm not sure when YouTube started, but you didn't
Yeah,
have.
like late 2000s,
Yeah, yeah.
2008 and 9, it was really taken off.
So you didn't have so much content and so much online courses and all the stuff that sometimes is being taken for granted right now. Also, we didn't have smartphones, which is a big one. So basically, when I started doing like these small projects, mostly for print, like drawing for children books, sometimes for different websites. Sometimes, like I worked with private businesses, doing everything I got, and it took me about 10 years to get to a point when I can like make a good living by art only. So like for the first 10 years, I had to do art and always do something else to make sure that I can pay the rent. Um, but later on, it took me about 10 years. It was actually after I did my first mobile game. And that was when the whole mobile game industry was just beginning. Like the first iPhone just came up, and here in Israel, game companies are starting to show up like mushrooms in the forest. Um, and then I was approached by a fairly new startup back then, who basically liked what I did back then and gave me a chance to start creating for this game. And ever since then, it was like a big snowball, because back then the industry in Israel was much smaller and more tight. If you were involved, everybody knew you. So after I did like my first game, I was starting to be approached by different companies and different startups, and get all the kind of offers. And I never looked back. But it did took me like 10 years to get there. I think
Yeah.
that right now, for at least in Israel, I think right now it's a much easier road. Um, a lot of my students are being like um, getting into work like in different studios and different companies here in Israel, sometimes like a couple of months after they graduate, which is very fast. So if it's not a couple of months, it will be 6 months, maybe a year. Um, yeah. So I always tell, like, I want to tell everybody's listening, like right now is the best time to be an artist than ever before. It will probably be better like 10 years from now. I don't know. Well, we'll probably talk about AI later, but
I would love to. I would love
yeah,
to. I'd love to get your take.
but like right now, we have like endless ways to share our art and to promote ourselves. And like 20 years ago, who thought that an artist can go like like couple of months after graduating and straightly get a job and start working and earn an honest living? So
Yeah, it's an
amazing.
interesting point to maybe unpack a little bit, because I've had this conversation with friends and talking about this, where for you and I are roughly the same age and sort of came into this industry from different angles, but around the same time. And there were established titles and positions and roles when it came to a career in art. In you've done all kinds of things. I've seen in your portfolio, in your list of things that you focus on: illustration, character design, art direction. These are all very specific tracks and roles that somebody could follow into and stay in. If they of course are geographically in the right location and have the right connections and went to the right school, and all these things play a part into your path as an artist. But so much of that has changed to your, going back to your point on the introduction of the internet. And I mean, really beyond the introduction of the internet, you start to get all of these tools like YouTube and self-learning, and not necessarily needing to go down a traditional educational pathway to get to a desired result. And it's such a cliche thing to say these days, but it is proven to be true that those tracks are not required anymore. So this idea of like having a specific role and being just an illustrator, I think that was a product of, the 90s and probably beforehand. But now there's so many versatile ways that you could go about being a creative person. And it seems to me, I'd love to hear your take on this and how you feel about these things, but to try to give advice to new people that are getting into this career path, and as they're looking to the future, to remember that this is that these things are constantly changing and evolving. I think around the conversation on AI, there's a lot of frustration, a lot of anger, a lot of backlash, the initial responses to those things. And I think it's very justified from the gut reaction as to how you see it. But if you evaluate how technology and how these tools change and grow, there's so much that we have in, from my perspective, that we have an impact on to help shape it into something that works better for us, to be able to be an artist, or to start your own channel, or to be an educator, or to do your own thing and sell and create your own art and all kinds of your own art in all kinds of different outlets. How do you feel about those things? Because I know that's a lot to unpack.
Yeah. So, I think, like, first of all, as an artist, there is like two main ways you can take upon. One is actually looking for a place to be an employee, and maybe have like a more steady feeling to your position. And the other is to be like an independent freelance artist, maybe even we can say entrepreneur in a way, um, because today there's so many opportunities, but it's really depends on the kind of person. Let's say that for me, I, another field that was always seemed very interesting for me is actually marketing. I did some stuff involving marketing which don't relate to art at all. And it was actually interesting from a different way, like the art of persuasion, and how to get people to do things. Like even in games, you want to buy your art, and you want to like uh, draw people to make an action, to make a move, to play a game, to do like a certain action, um, a call to action as we call it. So even if you think like on the field itself, like if someone has a little bit of knowledge of marketing, I think there is no limits to what he can do, even as a independent contractor, as an entrepreneur. I had a student that previously she created a series of coloring books that had like each one of them had like its own concept, and started selling those coloring books on Amazon, and creating an income from that, which I thought was amazing. Like I think like sometimes people are afraid to approach those things because they kind of feel like out there and will, maybe not so steady. But people can go to create stuff and sell it on print on demand, and they can create their own books and their own comic books and their own graphic novels, or decide they're starting a t-shirt line with their art printed on the t-shirts. There are so many things that can be done like these days. So it's a matter of approach and mindset.
Yeah.
Yes, but like in going to the other direction, in looking like a place to be hired. I think first of all, maybe it's my perspective from being like an independent contractor for so many years. Um, for me, I feel like it's only an illusion of security. It's like instead of running your own business, you say, okay, I will be employed by this organization or a person, which basically runs his own business. So you say, I don't want to deal with all this business stuff, and it feels like risky to me. Um, and you actually get the feeling of being like more secured when someone else is running the business. Sometimes that's the case. Probably some people can run a business better than you. But sometimes it's nothing more than illusion, because when you run your own stuff, you have all the control and you know where everything is going. Um, and you can decide with who you want to work and with who you don't want to work. So it has many upsides to that as well.
Hmm. What do you think about, and I think that's really great advice. It's something for all to consider. I have observed that, generations of artists that are coming in behind us and, coming into an age where they're starting to think about these things, think about education, think about what they want to do with these skills. I see plenty of people in the Magma community that have amazing skills, but don't necessarily know what to do with them, where to utilize them correctly. It can be very hard when there when there's too many options. It almost starts to feel like you can't make any decision. Like what is it that, from your perspective, being I would consider very much an entrepreneur, somebody who's thinking outside of the box and not attaching yourself to an entity, a studio, or a thing. What do you think is the most important aspect in finding success on that path?
Yeah. So first of all, a disclaimer. Like almost 3 months ago, I joined a new game studio inside Playtika, which is a big game company here in Israel. I joined them as an art team leader, and there I basically managed the art, the art of the product. And actually, it relates to something we just spoke about, which is I felt like if you're not inside the game, like it's like time keep passing when it's like you're in space, and then you go back to Earth and you see you only been there a month, and in Earth it's gone like 6 months, right?
A great analogy.
Yeah, yeah. So like things are progressing and evolving, and if you are outside of the loop, you can really tell. Like after a couple of years, you can really tell. So for me, like, and for my students, and I feel like uh, one important thing I offer my student, it's not only like the drawing stuff. It's like having the connection to the industry and to the people that are in important position inside the industry, and helping like to bridge that gap. Um, but I digress. So please remind me the question.
Well, because it's a nebulous one. It's like this idea of, to add to what you just kind of unpacked a little bit, is that you've been working, sort of generally speaking, freelance, where you're working on different projects, and then you're removing yourself from those projects and moving on to new things. In this
Hmm.
case, you're now working for a game studio, at least for the time being. There's really no
Hmm.
set plan for how long that's going to be. You're not necessarily looking for retirement money and all these other things, but success on that path, I find really a really fascinating topic, because I know plenty of people that do all kinds of things in 3D and 2D and bouncing around from one thing to another. And the truth is, and maybe to kind of speak to the artists, because I oftentimes we want to talk about success and what it looks like to be a professional, but there is a reality in the process of seeking to go down that path, that it can be really challenging to maintain stamina, to maintain creative outlet. Sometimes you might have to work on a project that you're not necessarily interested in. How do you approach balancing that stuff in your own life, and just keeping yourself able to continue to create?
Yeah, that's very important. So, like, if any of our listeners already have an experience working with a studio or even independently, they probably know that once you sit with your digital pen and drawing for, let's say, 8 hours a day, you probably won't feel like keeping on drawing once you're done. So whenever you turn your passion to work, it's obviously a little bit, it bites a little bit, it takes a bite of the passion, and it turns to work eventually. um, and I do think, like, you talked about success, and I think it's very important for everyone to actually identify what success means to him. Because if success is actually, let's say, you got into the place you wanted to break into, let's say you work, I don't know, you will always dream to work in Disney, and then you got like the chance and you're working in Disney and you're doing like this very stressful work because you're just starting, and maybe you're not making as much money as you thought, and you need to keep an apartment and maybe even get a car, or I don't know. So are you successful? Maybe, yeah, maybe that's what's in the highest importance. Maybe someone else he got like a position where he makes a great salary. He has some sorts of a steady position, but let's say he's not really liking what he's creating. Maybe doesn't really like to go to work, or doesn't like the people he's working with. I don't know. So
Mhm.
is he successful? So I think it's like a very individual balance there. I think that eventually we strive to be happy, and maybe it takes some time. I can tell from my own experience, like it took some time to actually realize what is the right mix for me, where is the balance for me, and also it took time like to actually be able to arrange things in a way that I can have some kind of control on that balance. But I think these days, like young artists that are just starting, they're actually also suffering from the amount of content that's being put out there every second. And I think something I get to see in a lot of young artists is they get like this false impression of what it takes, or how long should it take them together, because like think about that, like for us, before iPhones, before Instagram, before YouTube, we was raised like by our parents that you need to work hard. Today we'll say to our kids that they need to work smart.
Mhm.
But also what happens is that they go on TikTok and they go on Instagram and they see this artist that has like, let's say, 300 followers, and maybe is also a young artist. He's 25 years old. He's been painting for 5 years, and has this huge following, and maybe he's very had a much projects that are being offered to him and stuff like that. But a lot of time they don't realize that those are the anomalies. Like the guy you see on Instagram with 300 followers, yes, some of them they like really earned it, like they worked like many years in the field, and it took them time. But you have those anomalies, and they're not really anomalies. I mean, like, they're obviously extremely talented, and that's why those they get those many followers.
Mhm.
But it's like seeing this person that like turned to this great artist in 5 years and has like this big following, and think that that's the model, that's the way, that's the model I want to copy. It's like wanting to be rich and saying, oh, I just look at that guy that won the lottery and I go do what he did.
Mhm.
So that's my analogy, because you're looking on you don't see, like, for every one of those artists that you follow on Instagram or whatever, there is like hundreds of thousands of artists that are trying to do the same, and they can't
Right.
catch a break, right?
Right. It makes me think there's so many things that comes to mind in that regard. But I come back to, you and I at our sort of stage in life and career, and having experienced this journey through the technological changes that have happened in digital art, just in digital art alone. This idea of, and it sounds like a cliche thing, because I listen to a lot of people that talk about these things, and I observe this stuff. I have observed this in my 20 years in the VFX and animation industry, that to your point back on so much content being existing out there, and that's setting the standard and the value system for an artist. I can add to some of the things that you said in that, the observations and what it actually means to be an artist, the way that I've boiled it down to simple concepts that are easier to understand, is that ultimately it's supposed to be about exercising this creative outlet, this desire to want to create something. And the ultimate example where we've seen success happen is when it's organic and natural, and it's something that you actually love to do, All the best artists I know that are incredibly successful and have gotten a lot of attention didn't necessarily go and copy a particular model. They started doing something that they loved, and they found a style, they found a thing that they were good at and that they loved to build on. And it's this idea that I picked this up, years ago, this idea of feedback loops, how important it really is to build a sustainable system where what you're putting into something comes back to you in a way that makes you want to keep doing it more for the right reasons. And to the point of creating art to gain attention or likes, I think that's a natural thing for any human to want in their life. It's like we do anything. It's not even about art as much as it is about life, is that you do stuff because you're a part of this like organic system around other people, and you need that feedback from those other people to feel fulfilled. And so those of us that are artists, we do that through our art. But one of the challenges, and this isn't a criticism really, but it to the point of so much art being created now, and there's just millions and millions of images, and a lot of the stuff that you'll see is people doing a lot of the same things, a lot of things that get attention, superheroes, fill in the blank, and all of that stuff is incredible. I've at least learned, or practiced rather, I try to practice this as much as possible, to not criticize those particular types of art just because there's too much of it. When I look at it from a technical standpoint, from an application standpoint, it looks amazing and it's spectacular. My question to those people would always be, well, does that make you feel like when you finish those pieces and you're doing a series of, say you just love comic book characters and you want to do, renders and recreations of comic book characters, if you're fully satisfied and it makes you want to keep creating that art, I think you should. But if it doesn't, it seems to me that you're not challenging yourself enough to try to push beyond your own bounds and to envision and create things that ultimately complete that feedback loop, that come back to you. Does that resonate with you? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think it basically boils down to the question: what is of more importance to you? Actually getting the satisfaction for your passion and creating what you're passionate about, or maybe it's more important to you to create a following, to create a community. Sometimes, like, I have a tendency to get bored really, really fast. Like million times I woke up and said to myself, oh, I'm going to start this series of illustrations in whatever concept that I have in mind. I go do like one or two, and like a couple of days later, I'm excited about something else. Now, because what I share is things that I mostly do for fun. Um, so I don't really mind it. Like I kind of learned to accept it, that it's part of what I'm doing, and it's part of me. Like trying to do things differently, and like I see like something that really inspires me, and I say, oh, I want to try to render something like this. I want to try to mix that style with that style. Um, but I did saw that sometimes, like a few years ago, I decided to create like a cartoon series of famous WWE professional wrestling stars that were back when I was younger, and I was watching it.
That's amazing. That's a boat that I missed. I unfortunately
Yeah,
missed a lot of that, but it's so much color and animation, and like the characters are incredible.
exactly. So I started this series, and I got a lot of feedback, and started to see like a growth in comments and following and everything. And eventually, like for me, the fuel ran out. Like I said, okay, I'm done with it. I want to go for something else. And I do think that when you want to create a following, and that's the marketing, Udi, speaking. When you want to create a following, it's actually important to be consistent, because what happens is that people that are starting to follow you, They see what you create and they start to follow you because of something specific, like a specific style or a specific subject that you present. And then it's like when they see something that is totally different, they're not interested in keeping on following you because I really liked what he did back there, but he's not doing it anymore. It's like you follow, it's like you're listening to a band and then they put out a new album that sounds totally different. And then you say, oh, what happened to them? They used to be that and they used to be. So I think there are there there is importance like to be like consistent in what you're creating if building a community and following it's what you're after.
Yeah.
um, I do think it's kind of creating a beast that you have to feed all the time. That's what I was feeling like. I found myself at a certain time like getting feedback for things I'm creating, and then my entire thought process changed. Like I was sitting near my screen, and I was thinking, what will they want me to create next? And it's like you're trying to feed something that you feel obligated, and I
Right.
need to
Well,
call.
it's the
I
same thing when people say, I want to create some piece of content that will trend. Like the idea that actually kind of goes against the idea of what trending really is. It's like you can't make something trend. You either you make something and it trends or not. It has to start from a place of, at least from what I'm hearing from you and what I would support, is that it needs to have some kind of authenticity to it that feels, and that's what people ultimately gravitate towards. They don't gravitate towards just, I mean, sure, you can get attention and likes for something that kind of is popular at the time, but ultimately it creates sort of like a false representation of like, oh, I finally made it because I did that thing and it got attention. And then you do the next thing that's maybe not that same thing, and you don't get the attention, and then you're demotivated because, oh well, I failed, I made it and then I failed.
Yeah, it's like today being creative and actually let's say nurturing your passion to drawing. It's almost like being a Buddhist monk. You really have to learn like how to separate yourself from your ego and how to like keep that holy zone where where your voice is the loudest voice. It's good to listen to other voices, to what's going around you, but I think it's very important that you keep your voice inside your mind. Like your voice should always be the loudest voice. And and yeah, it's difficult these days like to say, I get feedback for creating this, but I really want to create that. um, yeah, it's kind of tricky. It's kind of tricky. I think that some people they just it I think that for a lot of people it comes naturally. Like there is a certain style that is so imprinted in them, and that's the only way they want to create stuff. I
Yeah.
have a great friend which I admire, and I see him as one of my mentors. He once said to me, I told them like, man, don't you want to try create something in a totally different style? And he told, because he's very consistent. So he told me it took me 10 years to develop and define and to polish my style. Why would I want to start from the beginning? So it kind of struck me because I never thought about it that way. So it was a totally different perspective on looking at it than the way I look at it. For me, it's like comparing it to food. It's like I really enjoy steak, but from now and now, I want to eat some pizza or burger. I don't know. So it's like I'm getting tired and I'm getting bored like really fast. And for me, I saw that if I make myself create something that is not for myself, I'm getting like pretty bummed out in very short amount of time. So I guess it's not for everyone.
Yeah. I think on that note, Chen's Art had a question on how to keep yourself motivated, being on the journey and not developing enough or good enough. How do you encourage yourself? It sounds like a lot of the this particular question, because it is such an important one. A lot of this is about the variability and the acceptance that there probably will come a time, as art is a career, whether whether we want to call it that or not. And as you've kind of highlighted in descriptions before, sometimes you're going to have to do some things that you don't necessarily love. It's not your style, but it's the application and you're capable of doing it. But to constantly be challenging yourself with new things and seeking to fulfill yourself wherever possible. And of course, ideally, if you can make that your primary pursuit where that's all you ever do, I think that's definitely absolutely possible. I've seen plenty of professionals that have found a way to carve their own space, creating their own platforms, creating their own channels, creating their own stuff, where they're selling their own artwork and they're pushing their stuff and their style. That's, I think, the peak, the apex mountain of like the artist's journey. Would you add anything else into that particular aspect of just simple concepts to keep yourself motivated?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's very important to consume content. For me, I can say that for a long time, I like stopped watch like different TV shows and series and stopped watching TV and start like I was really envious of my time and everything that wasn't seem like it progresses me in a certain direction. It felt like a waste of time. And then after a while, I started noticing that I have less ideas. I felt like I have less inspiration. And then I realized that in order to create content, in order to have an output, you must have an input. You need to consume content. You need to go and do things and watch things and be inspired and get a break from actually drawing. So that's one important thing. Also, I think that one thing that really hinders the motivation, especially for a younger artist, but also experienced artists as well, is comparing themselves to what they see in different places, in different social medias and stuff like that, and like the gap between where they at and where they want to be can be really discouraging. But I think it's important to take on smaller challenges, and it's hard before you feel like you made like a real progress. It's hard to tell yourself it will take time because we want everything fast and right now. But I think that if I can suggest something for people that are practicing and want to get better, is actually differentiate between painting and doing exercises. And I'll expand on that if I may. So when someone has like an inspiration for illustration or a painting, it starts like a new painting, and basically that painting uh, probably is evolves around every aspect of art, because in that painting there will be things that are regarding perspective, and there may be lighting, and maybe composition, and maybe anatomy, and maybe whatever. So everything, all the fundamentals and all those different subjects and areas in drawing and painting goes inside this one painting. And then you don't really have the chance to go deeper into a specific area and say, right now I'm working on getting my perspective better. Right now I'm working on getting my anatomy better. Right now I'm working on drawing and knowing how to draw better hands, whatever it is. So I think if someone breaks down his practice to like this smaller exercises, it's a little bit like going to the gym, right? Let's say that someone is a sprinter is a professional sprinter. So basically what he does when he competes, he runs, but he also goes to the gym and he do different leg exercises to get his leg muscle stronger. And he knows that if his legs muscle will be stronger, he will run faster. So it's kind of the same analogy. Like when you paint, it's like going on a sprint, but you don't have to sprint all the time. You can go to the gym and make your leg muscle stronger. So that will mean like doing like small exercises, like taking different exercise in perspective, different exercise in anatomy, like doing like these small challenges. And then what happens, I think it's actually much more beneficial. And in that way, a person will make actually greater progress. And also, it's less taxing. It's like you didn't spend like 4 hours on a painting where eventually you don't like the way it turned out, right? So you're doing like these small exercises, you can recuperate much faster.
Right. I think it's a really great analogy. This idea of diverse training and of course the fundamentals are absolutely imperative to comprehend and to be able to apply. And this idea of also constantly learning. I mean, this is something that I think applies to just the nature of being human and to be fully fulfilled is that when we the idea of getting bored with things or getting settled on stuff usually kind of relates to or connects to then most likely there's something in your life that you know it's stagnant, it has no, it's not, you're not enriching yourself because you aren't challenging yourself to do other things and pushing yourself beyond your own boundaries. Because the truth is that we can always improve. We can always continue, well, we will continue to learn if you allow yourself and put yourself in that position. I find the times when I'm most motivated is when I'm engaged with something new and something different, that and it may be something that I've done in the past but I forgot about. Perfect example for me is, you know, I spent, you know, over 10 years in my career in 3D. You know, I learned, you know, I studied fine arts and I learned core fundamentals, and then I transitioned into film and animation and spent so much of my time in 3D where I wasn't drawing a lot. I wasn't doing a lot of those things because the tasks that I was presented with in my career didn't require me to. And now I'm stepping back into, you know, this magma culture and going back to core drawing and painting, and I'm actually surprisingly so excited to dive back into these things and take more classes and brush back up on these things, and it's like it lights a fire inside of you to be doing something new.
Also, I'm sure that everything you did in your 3D career is actually will be coming into effect once you go back to drawing. Like you won't have like the same mind and skills, and you won't see the things the same as you did like 10 years ago or before you got into 3D. And I think it's another point as well. Like I think every little thing that you do, like let's say that painting or drawing is like your main road, but I think like taking like these short stops, for you it wasn't so short, but like these short detour, short stops along the way will really add to what you're doing. And so for me, I was also a 2D artist since the beginning. And when I came to IAC, I came to learn 3D, and I was fascinated by it back then. And I said, "Oh, what is all this 3D stuff?" and and I was really fascinated about it. And I can say it's totally um, influenced the way I approach art. Which is another different conversation we can have, because I think like the 3D, let's say revolution, I don't know how we call it, like the
It very
3D.
much is. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it really it actually created this new kind of artists. Like if you think about it, I'm going to a different subject. I'm giving
I love
myself
it.
the permission. So if you think about it, like not too long ago, most of the artists came from a more traditional education, Rather it's like oil painting or drawing, life drawing or whatever, like more traditional education. And then they took it to different fields in animation or character design or whatever. But like the background was the same, and most of the knowledge was to actually draw or paint from observation. And then after basically people started being involved in 3D, you saw like this merge of new artists that are approaching painting like a 3D render, like 3D software, like they're rendering, like they say, okay, let's first do like the main light, and let's do the key light, and let's do the reflections, and let's do the ambient occlusion, and let's do the bounce light, and let's do whatever. So they do like these passes, and they really approach it, and they dissect things like a 3D software, which I really relate to that approach because it's easier for me to grasp it. And I think it's actually a great approach that allowed like this new kind of artist that was merged to actually be more of an inventors. And what I mean by that is like when you draw or paint from observation, you can really stick to what you're seeing when you're painting, or you can use what you're seeing but change it a little bit. But I think that eventually, if you want to like really draw from your imagination and like invent stuff, eventually you have to understand perspective and volumes and how to turn things and change camera angles and how to set up different lighting setups and all those sorts of stuff. So I think it's like a different approach, and I also think that someone who is actually a beginning artist should maybe see from all the content he's watching, what is the approach that he can relate more, because I think that not all men are born the same, and probably there will be artists that if they step into one of my classes, they won't find themselves, and they will find it hard to relate to the approach or to the way I dissect things and explain things. And maybe like a more traditional approach will be much more convenient or fit them much better. And the same thing goes the other way. So I think that it's very important, like to know how to pick your teacher, how to pick your mentors, and to actually to realize that there are different approaches to things, and it can really affect like your trajectory when you're starting.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great advice. I mean, so much in there is great to follow, and as you said, there's so many different ways to do things, and maybe ultimately the best way is whatever supports your growth as an artist and a person, because there are educators that are very strict on a certain approach and the way you need, or maybe they would say should do things. And I think there's a good thing in there for many people. Some of us do need strict guidance. Some of us need that like very direct approach. You know, I would put myself in that category where I always lacked the ability to really fulfill those things in my own ways. I'm a very quick learner and I pick things up very easily. But in terms of the creative application and the process from a fundamentals perspective, I always needed direct guidance. But then there are those of us that understand things that don't necessarily need that. And ultimately, the goal for you is to find a place where you can ultimately succeed in applying that and moving into, you know, the top tier group of artists. And I would consider all those people that, and even those that sit outside, but the professional realm, I always kind of think of as like a ring system where you have like the gold and the silver and the bronze. And there's so many people that are super talented that exist just outside of the bronze. And if you want to step into that category, I think a lot of the things that you've been talking about are essential. to getting into that space. And some of it is just strength and willpower and mental fortitude to be able to withstand the experience. And maybe it's not for everyone to be doing it professionally. Some of us have talent and skill and ability that we don't necessarily need to do that for work. We can do other things. But if it's something that you're looking to get into from a professional perspective, it seems to be so crucial to be able to maintain all of these things, find the right mentors, find the right educators to help you get there, and realize that you cannot do it on your own if you really want to succeed in that regard.
Yeah, there are many artists who are self-educated. I can say that in 2D art, I can say I'm pretty much self-educated. Like I did had mentors, and I was attending a lot of workshops and a lot of courses, but like at least the beginning of my journey was mostly books, and after books, a little bit of online courses and a little bit of mentorship meetings and stuff like that. And there are people that can really progress and get great results with self-learning. But I think again, it goes back to what I said of seeing this artist with 300 followers in Instagram and think that every artist or successful artist has the same approach or the same path, which really give like the wrong impression of how most of the artists are basically the path that they're being led to. I think more than anything, when you start learning for yourself, the thing that can maybe delay you in your progress is actually not knowing what comes first. It's like it's like when you build like a curriculum, and from your point of view of having more experience, that first they have to learn this, and then they need to learn that, and then they go on and do that. And sometimes when people are self-learning, they will basically go straight ahead to what seems like the most enjoying, and what will be like the more sexy topics, right?
Yeah,
So,
the quick fixes, the quick
yeah.
reward.
So if let's say a person goes to a certain website, and then he sees digital painting course, they learn how to render and do textures and do all sorts of stuff, and then beside that you see like this 3 months perspective course. So it probably like perspective will be like the more not so attractive maybe subject to dive into. But basically, I think perspective will be like learning the alphabet. Before you, if you want to become a writer, you first learn the alphabet, then you learn to write words. And perspective, it's like the gardening rule that evolves around anything. Like everything is under the umbrella of perspective. Like even if you draw the clouds in the sky, even if you draw a character smoking a cigarette, like the smoke will have perspective.
Right.
So yeah, so I think that people that going to the path of self-learning, they're really missing on knowing what should come first and how to build like this, like a solid learning program.
Yeah.
And I can give them a little hack. Obviously, I want them to come to my courses. That's one hack, but I can give them another hack. So if you're self-learning, what you can do is actually go inside the sites of like the best schools, and watch in their websites what is the curriculum they're offering, and then say yourself, I see this is the order they are teaching the different subjects, so it might be a good idea to set up your self-learning in the same way.
Right. That's a great hack. It really is, because it does point to the idea that no matter what you want to do, those core fundamentals are absolutely essential to your success, to be able to break, to even be able to break away from those things and not necessarily have to worry about them. And kind of thinking about that gold and silver and bronze tier, I see so many talented people that just have an incredible eye, maybe don't want to jump into the more challenging or time consuming parts of that aspect, which is why maybe some of the work just sits a little bit outside, and it's like the thing that you're missing, and I think the reality in career in art, or just pursuing to be a great artist and to be fulfilled, is that ultimately you're going to come to this place in the road one way or the other. I've seen friends and people that I went to school with that didn't make it, that didn't go far enough, and struggled through, and kind of ran into these walls that just ultimately derailed them and demotivated them to not be able to push past that part. Some of it is perseverance and will. You can will yourself to that place, but ultimately, no matter what, if you don't set yourself up with the right trajectory and pathway to get there, it's better to get those things done quick and understand them. And then you open up these doors to this entire creative space that you will continue to learn. And, going back to me spending time in different industries and spending time in 3D, it absolutely does circle back. I now realize, and I can see that I did the long form approach. I did the cross country path, where I was like, I'm just gonna pace myself and keep going, and luckily it worked out. I think from my personal experience, it speaks to my drive and will to just keep pushing through and finding an avenue that works. But I didn't particularly develop into the best artist I possibly could. And yet I still have a whole nother chunk of life that I will continue to evolve and take the stuff I've learned, learn from some of the bad practices, try to undo those things and rethink how I do stuff now. I imagine that there's plenty of people that can relate to that part of the experience. And, for you spending 20 years or more, working on these things, I'm sure you can relate to that as well. There's the things that you learn along the way, but the thing that I hope most by people seeing these conversations and talking about this stuff, as much as we do a lot of it, and there's plenty of content out there to watch, this is the type of content that I think is the most important when it comes to early development. To hear these things and think about it and try to put these things into practice. It's like that Zen philosophy that you talked about earlier, that Buddhist monk philosophy is I think so true in finding a way to cope with the experience and continue moving forward. It makes me think, on the topic of fundamentals, I think this is probably a really great segue. Actually, there might be, Juan said, great topic. Thanks, Juan. Thanks. Much appreciated. Glad to know that this is connecting with you guys, and it makes me think to add to that. It's a topic that I think is really important to discuss in this digital revolution of AI art, and how this is progressing into our industries. What's your general take on the introduction of AI art? How do you feel about it? What are your concerns? Whatever comes to mind.
Well, first of all, I don't have any concerns. I think it's like worrying about the weather. You really have no control over it. So I think I feel about AI that, first of all, it's something that it can't be undone. It's something that is here. It's here to stay, and it will keep evolve. And nobody really knows how it's going to look like 1 year from now or 2 years from now. Like, people can speculate, and some people are actually a lot closer to the AI revolution than we are, maybe working in different AI companies, and even they don't really know how it will look like 1 year from now. But I think, first of all, there's no really there isn't any sense. It's not make sense to actually resist it, or trying to be against it in any way, because it's a losing game. Like, it's like trying to resist this big tractor, like coming down, breaks down, and say, I really don't like this tractor. I will stand here and I will try to stop it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you can go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting thinking about that particular part of we this is something I've talked about in the past on our last podcast, which is that it's not fun to say that it's like the you can't the old analogy, you can't, if you can't beat them, join them kind of thing. I don't know if that necessarily applies in this regard. I think you're absolutely right when it comes to this is something that it will have a place. How do you feel about the way I see these types of tools? If you think about the transition from practical effects before the digital tools, and Photoshop being initially incepted and created to fulfill desires to make Star Wars. I mean, that's literally the only reason. I mean, or rather, it's the first reason why we have Photoshop, and that brings in this whole new wave of course 3D tools and automation and animators, and it created all kinds of new jobs, which is an exciting new frontier, the digital frontier of art. And the practical stuff, of course, wasn't necessarily used in the same ways that it was before these tools came, and it's changed, but it never went away. This idea of creation in art and the fundamentals and all of these things, it seems to me that you do need to ebb and flow with these things. They are going to have practical applications in the career fields and speeding things up, but it doesn't mean that the need for core creation in art should go away. How do you feel about this?
First of all, I don't think that the core fundamentals of art will ever go away. Maybe ever is it's a strong word, but they will stay for a long time. I feel like, like everything else in the past, in history of art, was eventually a little bit, let's say, it got resisted at first. Um, we had like portrait painters that were doing these wonderful portraits of kings and maybe commanders and all great people in history, or maybe just some portraits, right? And then they invented the camera, and you had people are going inside this box with the black drape over the head and holding the flashlight and started taking pictures. But you didn't see portrait painting disappear. It just took a little bit of a different meaning, a different. It took on a different place in culture. Um, let's jump a few years further, and then we're starting creating things digitally. I still remember how people felt about the first Wacom. Like when I started like 2D art, I started like doing everything manually. I worked with inks and pencils and everything. And I remember that once I showed the people like things, then I told them that I did them digitally. Oh, you didn't buy a computer. The computer did everything for you. You just put like this, push this magic button.
Yeah.
So right now it's a little bit more like that. It's like a magic button, but I do feel that like everything else, first of all, it will be probably just another tool that, yeah, it will have effect on how we approach things and how we get things done. But first of all, it's a tool. And I think, you said if you can't beat them, join them. I say, if you can't beat it, enjoy it.
Mm.
Because eventually it's a tool, and it will be um, an unseparated part of the art industry. It's already an unseparated part from the art industry. So it will be that in either way. So you can just, try to resist it, or you can be one of the first that actually that can say, I can also create 2D art. I can also create those great concepts. And I also can use AI, and I use it maybe to help my concepts, maybe to get better ideas, maybe just for inspiration. Maybe I create my art using some sorts of assets and elements from AI. It really doesn't make any difference. I, and eventually, I don't think it makes it less of an art. It does make it maybe less of a craft. So maybe we can differentiate between the craft of it all, and actually creating art. Because if my end goal is to create like this frame that really convey my concept, my idea, the atmosphere, the mood that I wanted to convey, if I did it with AI, 3D, photo bashing, whatever, photography, it doesn't really matter. And like the end goal was to present this concept, and if I succeeded to convey the concept in a good way, so I think it's a success. So we need to differentiate between art and creating concepts and creating ideas and actually the craft of it. So yeah, maybe things will be, if in the near future artists can use like AI to create certain parts of their art, or color it faster, or use AI to fix their perspective. I don't know what.
Mm.
Eventually, it will be just another tool, and I really think that from like 5 years from now, if all the people that are resisting AI and saying no to AI, and I don't want to come off like this anti-resisting person. I do understand, um, let's say, like the moral complication that artists have with it. Like I'm sure that my drawings and my designs are probably part of some kind of AI learning, I don't know what, which is fine by me, and I understand why for some reason it can rub them the wrong way, and I think they're right. I think they're right. It's not that I don't think they're right. I think it's just something that we can't resist. It's like it's like a storm is coming, and you think, and you're trying to tell this big tornado that is wrong, but it won't stop the tornado.
It's a great analogy. It really is, and I would be so bold as to say this is something that, and I'm willing to voice that. I also initially, when this kind of started cropping up, 8, 9 years ago, and seeing some of the early examples coming out, and my initial thought was, as much as it is now, where the conversation is kind of focused on the damages that it will have to careers and professionals that are in this space. I would push back to say that it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier when it comes to what it actually means to be creating art and what that does for humanity. I mean, you think about the introduction of content and creation of entertainment, movies, video games, the things that we watch and absorb on a daily basis. To your point earlier, people consuming too much and getting lost in the forest of not necessarily knowing how to apply themselves. I think this is all very much connected. It's an aspect of humanity that we keep moving forward. We struggle with the acceptance of things changing. Every generation looks back on the old generation and goes, "Oh man, look at them. They're not doing it right. Like they should be thinking about these things." And that's the wisdom of getting that you gain from getting older and looking back and seeing the pitfalls that the people coming after you are making. And it's not to say that the older generations aren't correct, but it's more so that we kind of get disconnected from each generation, as if once we get to a certain place, things are supposed to stay the same, and we're all supposed to accept that. And I think in some regards, life would be very different if we did learn this ability collectively to stop and go, well, some of these new things we've added, smartphones and the ability to absorb so much content. You look at what it does to a person and how people are buried in their phones and watching things too much. I myself, growing up on sci-fi and fantasy and watching so much stuff, it was like I always imagined that, man, I can't wait until I get older. I'll just be able to hang out and there's going to be more content to watch and I can absorb more and more and more stuff. But I've come to find that by absorbing so much stuff, we talked about this earlier, how much that's affected my creativity and my feedback loop and being fulfilled in life. And I've had to now put into practice more regularly that I don't absorb too much stuff. I set aside things where I know that's not going to give me something good, because ultimately it's just going to distract me and take away from time where I could be spending more time on my own aspects of life and putting my own actions into place to get something from it. Because ultimately, life, I think, is about action and doing. So, with all of that in mind, I think about AI art, and yes, absolutely, there's going to be technical applications where it's going to be amazing. I mean, on the positive side, think about what it takes to make a video game. Hundreds of people working on storyboarding and concepting and writing a story and coming up with these things. Now we have the potential to be able to do this in smaller groups of people. Now, one person with these assisted tools, by interjecting ourselves into the conversation and focusing on what gives back to us as human beings, and just particularly if we're talking about art in this regard, it seems to me that there's a lot of promise and benefit that can come from it if you can remove the concept of needing to do it for likes or for attention or views, or making a Netflix show or making a film that's going to get blockbuster, ticket sales, or fill in the blank. This idea that we need to do things just because it's we get something in return, usually it's money or attention. I think this kind of points to a bigger conversation that I don't hear talked about enough in this regard. And my philosophy, and something that we are incentivizing here at Magma, because we've talked about this a bit. Magma is going to be we're in beta for introducing AI tools, but we'd like to come into this in a space where we obviously have a core creation tool, and this is very much about collaboration. We do not want to destroy that. If anything, we want to enhance that and offer the ability to utilize these things in ways that make sense, to then focus on the thing that gives back to you most, which is creating, which is fundamentals, which is connecting with human beings. The idea that AI is going to destroy art, I think, is understandable, and I think that that's a natural reaction, kind of going back to the generational ways of thinking, like, oh no, it's you will it into existence by thinking of it that way. If you were to reverse that way of thinking and say, AI art's going to become pretty, I imagine it will be very stylized and very specific. You're going to know that something's AI. You're going to know, when you look at an Instagram feed where somebody's doing oil paintings or watercolor or other things, you appreciate the physical application. You actually have more respect for it than you do the posterization or the digital recreation of something that is, as you said, a different form of art. It doesn't mean that it's not art. It just means that it's a different thing. And putting our values on those things equally, to me, seems like a more enjoyable process to go through as we move forward into the future with these things.
That's a great point, and I think something that I really didn't read or hear anybody thinking of. So I will do like a Conor McGregor and go Mystic Udi on something. Okay, like I think that a few years from now, AI will actually increase the value of traditional art. So I think that something that people are not thinking about or taking into consideration, it's actually every day the amount of images that are being generated by AI is actually becoming much and much greater than the amount of manual created or human created art. So eventually we will come to a point when computer generated, AI generated images will be like the internet will be so saturated with AI created images that eventually it will actually increase the value of something that is created by a human. And this is how anything works. Like when something is so abundant, it loses value. And when something is more scarce, its value will increase. So that's one thing that actually keeps me pretty optimistic. Um, and another thing that I think that like probably what AI will do in like the next few years, it's not will I don't think it will replace as many artists as people may think. probably some, but I think it will more come to place not only like concepting and trying to get ideas. It will probably affect studios and businesses mostly in the quantity aspect of it. So let's say that I created this, I don't know, character, and now I need to create the same character in different poses, from different angles, in different position, maybe actually move it, make it talk or whatever. And till now, it was actually required me to create all those frames and the animation. And maybe we are going into times when we can create a character and we can get different options, or parts of the work can be completed by AI. I think it will still require the intervention of a human to actually do like all the final. It's like, think of when like a human captured animation started. Like you had like 3D animators animating 3D models, 3D characters, and then we're starting like putting people in suits with all the sensors, and we started recording movement and doing like this human captured very realistic animations. And I don't know, maybe it was back then, but I don't remember all the animators are gathering and say no to human captured animation because it will take us all our work, right? So I think it will basically, it probably will change the way we approach things. But I think like, you know, as we go on, the demand for more content always increases.
Mhm. It's a great point, and to add to that, this idea of this is my this is my dreamer approach. This is my hopeful sort of call to the artist community, is that and if we observe the type of content that we're all watching now, Disney Plus, watching Marvel shows, Netflix, watching all kinds of different things that are coming out, whatever streaming services you're into, even anime, just the growth of anime and how it's changed. I've observed in at least in my circles, and this is speaking from people that exist in the US, because we are so inundated in technology and entertainment. I think entertainment being it's one of our biggest outputs in this country is entertainment. We do it so well and we do it so often. The volume is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And yet so many people that I talk to aren't satisfied or happy with the content that they see. Very rarely do you get something that is just loved by all or most. And even then you get a lot of criticism, of course. So the idea of becoming more critical, my observations just in human behavior, when you think about the evolution of people, is that this idea of quantity is not better than quality. My pushback to anybody who's against these things is then, well, this is an opportunity then for us to rethink what we define as quality. This is an aspect to human nature that, as we evolve and grow, it's a nice sentiment to think that we can stay in one place and we can whittle down the things that are most important to us. But I think the reality of, whether you want to call it evolution or something else, the idea of people evolving is we desire constant change. We adapt and we change to new variables to the equation. Introduce a new variable, something else comes out that you don't know or can't predict what will happen. That's the beauty of being a human being and being creative. And I think human beings are creative just at their core. What we define as creative is kind of its own thing now. We like to classify things now more than ever because it just makes sense for us to do so. And yet we wonder why we aren't necessarily as happy as we could be. And I think the idea of the unknown is a part of our existence and a part of what makes us whole. And by embracing this is an opportunity in just this particular conversation to think about these tools. And maybe instead of recreating things that you've seen or focusing on the same subject matters that a lot of people are creating content around, this is an opportunity to rethink what that is. And I see so many young people coming into these creative realms that are bringing something new to the table. Maybe don't necessarily know what the outlet is, but my hope and my belief is that there will be a time where that stuff is, these channels and these ways of communicating and sharing content is going to evolve into something so much bigger, a space that now you can, and YouTube is a great example where you see people making all kinds of channels around all kinds of things, or streaming on Twitch, or having little communities and doing stuff that they find fun and engaging. And there's so much more room. There's more to do. There's always more to do. That's the beauty of it. And of course, we do want to keep the human experience as a part of this. I think that's the ultimate fear with AI, is that a technology, and it's the whole Terminator. Science fiction has played up AI so much for the last 100 years that it's kind of hard for us to see outside of that, because a lot of it rings true, and we think it's like, I always think about it like this. Think about Blade Runner. Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner, coming out in a time where, at least in the States, that was kind of the topic of conversation, that Japanese culture was going to take over. And it was going to be in the version of 2019 in Blade Runner was, Coca-Cola ads and, Japanese banners and ads and all, and the stylistically Japanese. It felt like a manga. It felt like Akira / something else. Did it pan out that way? No, it actually didn't. We didn't move as far as we thought we would. We don't have flying cars. We don't have all these things. The way it plays out, and I think the way that our fears and our doubts and our insecurities actually play a big part into that. So being confident and almost trying to wrangle this thing a little bit and give it a direction that heads in a way that we all can benefit from, to me, seems like the most positive and beneficial outlook in kind of navigating this stuff. And I think that very much starts with people like us, the creative people that are doing the stuff and imagining the visions of the future. What does that look like to you?
Yeah. So first of all, I feel like we are really, really lucky. Like, we are a generation that got to go from no internet to internet, from no smartphones to smartphones, from no touch screen to touch screens, from no AI to AI. So I think we're actually lucky, and I see myself as like this enthusiast, like viewer that looking on everything unfolding from the side, and I'm really excited to see how it will unfold. And I think what is the most difficult for different artists, it's not really, I believe, that it's not as much as AI using our artwork or stealing our images, and it's all valid. But I think what's most difficult is that it happens really, really fast. It happens really fast, and whenever a change happens so fast, it's like we're being pulled off everything we knew. Like, reality as we knew it is changing in dramatic fashion in such a short amount of time. And I feel it's like a mourning process. It's like when you lose someone, and you're going through the phases of denial and then anger, and then, so I feel like we're actually mourning on the industry and the reality of art industry as we knew it. And then we have to accept that it doesn't exist in the way we knew it anymore. And we're embracing ourselves to something new, but you can actually resist it, or you can say, oh, that's interesting. Let's enjoy the ride and see how it unfolds.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great outlook, and I completely agree. I think that is that we are divided when it comes to our perspectives and opinions on things, and that is also part of the beauty of the conversation, is that everyone's opinion matters. Those fears and doubts and concerns need to be voiced, and they need to be heard, and we need to consider these things, and then we also need to be optimistic and as you say, think about what it is that we want to do with these things, and interject ourselves into it. I appreciate your willingness to talk about it, and this whole conversation has been incredible. I hope that the viewers and those that will be watching will get something from this. And on this topic of fundamentals in education that we brought up earlier, I wanted to take, as we're wrapping up here closer to the end, I wanted to introduce something that we're going to be launching here next week, actually, with you. is Magma workshops. Do you want to talk a little bit about what it is that you're planning to do for these workshops?
Yeah, thank you so much. So next week we're basically planning the first, I hope one of many Magma workshops. I will be doing a workshop for character design, and I will share my processes and my approach and the way I look at things and I approach things when I go about designing a new character. It will also be an interactive workshop. That means that our viewers and followers can apply to join, and they will actually, in the second half of the workshop, will get their own canvases and will be able to try the different techniques that I will teach or present, and also get a little bit of feedback from me. Maybe I can give them, a little bit, a little nugget of information that will click, and that will be a great achievement. And basically, just have fun and hopefully create something that will turn up cool, and I can show it off on my Instagram, and that will be great.
Is going to be incredibly cool. There's going to be tons of nuggets coming out of this with great information. I think I've seen your work. We've gotten to know each other over the years. I've seen you present. You have such an incredible way of articulating information and process while making it fun, and very much is needed within the Magma community with people in all kinds of walks of life. We're super excited to be bringing this aspect to Magma and doing as much of this as possible. The plan here, and if you're interested in doing this, you will see in the YouTube link below, there's access to our Discord. Join our Discord. We're going to have a separate channel or thread that's focused on Magma workshops where you can find out more information. The plan here is to make this a first come first serve basis, because you're going to be working with Udi and getting feedback and critiques. This is more of a it's a casual free access. There's no price or charge for this. This is free information that Udi is willing to give to you, and Udi, you sharing your process and all kinds of different focuses. We talked about doing character design or doing other things like just figuring out how to draw the head correctly, or doing clothing folds, or shading and lighting, all kinds of things we can open up into. And the idea is that we'll be running this workshop for the time being every 2 weeks. This is going to be starting next Tuesday. We'll be dropping more information inside of Discord on this, and we really hope that you guys enjoy this and sign up immediately. Join the Discord. We'll be dropping more information on this throughout the week. And yeah, Udi, it's been such a pleasure, man. I really appreciate the conversation and the time.
I had a great time, man. Always a pleasure to talk to you, man.
Same, absolutely. Well, thanks everyone for watching, and we'll catch you guys next time on the Magma podcast.
That was great.